What do most Fortune 500 executives have in common? After more than 100 episodes recorded with those very executives from companies like Disney, Amazon, Netflix, Cigna, and Google, the answer is clear. They learned lessons in leadership from the fields and courts of their high school and collegiate sports teams. Some of our guests' athletic experience earned them a place in their sports Hall of Fame, like Chick-fil-A Chairman Dan Cathy. Some hung up their cleats after high school, like Delta Airlines CEO Ed Bastian, while others, like Condoleezza Rice, claimed they were terrible in their sport. But no matter their skill level, they have all told me that being a part of a team taught them lessons they still use as leaders today. In partnership with Maxwell Leadership, I'm your host, Don Yeager, here to give you an all-access pass to genuine, authentic, fireside chat-like conversations with today's business icons so that you can create powerful, positive change in your own organization. This is Corporate Competitor Podcast. With me for today's episode is Andrea Fairchild, Senior Vice President of Global Sponsorship Strategy at Visa. Andrea spearheads the company's partnerships with prestigious events like the Olympics, the Paralympics, FIFA, and the NFL. She's entrusted with delivering Visa's brand, product, and client objectives while propelling business growth and enhancing the brand's impact. For more than 2 decades, she has passionately merged her love for sports in her career, working for companies like Nike, Gatorade, and serving as president of Kobe Bryant's Kobe Inc. She comes highly recommended from our past guest, Renee Anderson, the Chief Revenue Officer of the National Football League. So I am looking forward to learning from Andrea today. Remember to visit corporatecompetitorpodcast.com/148 and download the notes and reflection questions we put together for you.
Break yourself to make yourself. Be comfortable in an uncomfortable situation. People are so quick to always want to answer the question because they feel like that's what's expected of them. You don't always have to have the answer. It's okay to be in a zone that allows you to find your own way. It's okay to be comfortable in that uncomfortable type of zone and take pride and courage in those uncomfortable situations that make you better when you come out of it.
Andrea, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Don. It's great to be here. I appreciate it.
You have so much connection between your business background and the world of sports. So I'm looking forward to learning from you how sports and business intersect and how the lessons from each play into the other. Heading down memory lane for a minute, going to Mount Zion High School, Central Illinois, beautiful place.
Yes. I did. I grew up in Central Illinois, kind of the bit of the middle of nowhere. Mount Zion, it's a suburb of Decatur, Illinois. Original home of the Chicago Bears, formerly the Staley Bears, though. That's a big claim to fame. I grew up on a huge farm. My father was a farm appraiser by trade and then a thoroughbred horse trainer by passion. That, from a sport perspective, was my day-to-day life, taking care of the horses, but then playing softball and running track, and anything that I could get myself motivated and moving around was interesting to me at that point in time. I will say too, sports in a school function also helped me get a little bit out of some of the day-to-day farm work. I'll be honest. I would say, an extrovert and love being around people. So the team environment is what made team sports so exciting to me. It was more the friendships and the partnerships that really helped make that exciting. I will admit as well, Don, I was not any way, shape, or form going to be able to take on sports outside of even my high school career because I lacked a lot of talent. I ran in track, the 400. I wasn't the best on the team, but also my senior year, made it to being the captain. That was a big accomplishment for me. That was a bigger accomplishment for me than winning each and every race. I had that value and trust in my teammates. So that meant a lot to me. Track, very individualistic for the most part.
Right.
You've got to work harder, train harder. It's kind of on you. Even though track is an individual sport, It's the sum of the parts. And on a high school level, your team is competing for points. Shot put was one of the disciplines within track, and absolutely no one wanted to do that. No one. We didn't have anybody that had that skill set or anyone that even wanted to kind of take a chance. I stepped up. I think it was because I worked on a farm and probably seemingly had the ability to throw something heavy. It was a step up to the plate type of moment. They needed somebody to fill the spot.
Right.
I didn't know anything about it, but every meet I would step up there and launch the shot put out as far as I could. It was a little embarrassing, a little humbling at times because it made me very uncomfortable because I just didn't have any skill in doing it and everybody knew it. But I did it because of the team. We needed to have that slot filled. And to me, that mattered the most in sports, was knowing others counted on me to do things that maybe I didn't necessarily want to do or that I wasn't comfortable doing, but it put me in a position to be a better teammate, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Someday, maybe I could have made it to the Olympics as a shot putter if I would have just applied myself a little bit harder, but I was terrible.
Did you ever end up placing?
Oh, of course I did. If there were only 3 people competing at the time, yes.
I love it. I love it. Because stepping up is what your story is really about. Your support around women's soccer through the Global Women's Initiative 15 years ago, Visa has been passionate would be an understatement. So much has changed in that last 15 years. We have another milestone coming up, 2023 Women's World Cup. What has been the major driver in the level of increased attention that's come the way of women's sports?
Yeah, at Nike 15 years ago, I worked on the Global Women's Initiative. Very male-dominated sports company at the time. We were certainly kind of that smaller, scrappier group when it came to the initiatives and the things that we had to work on. Commitment to women's sports isn't short-term. And it's never been a short-term goal for me in the work that I have done. I feel strongly that these women are game changers, really, in the biggest sense of the word, and taking women's athletics to a new level and working for a brand that gives me the opportunity to do that, extremely fulfilling. It's elevating those stories behind what made them the amazing athletes that they are today. Behind every number, there's a story. And it's what you and I are talking about today. You know, it is what you have centered a lot of your conversations around. I know you had Renee Anderson on from the NFL. Like, there is a story behind every one of those amazing women out there. And to understand that, authenticity, the key in all storytelling, to be authentic and humble yourself in the journey.
Yeah.
Serena Williams was one of our marquee athletes. We used her in our campaigns. She was younger then, so was I, and wasn't as well known as she is today. That authenticity of how hard that struggle was to get where they are, and then the ability for other young girls to see that and know that there's always going to be an opportunity there in life and in business. I attended the She Believes Cup a few months ago. The amount of young fans in the crowd holding their signs for the U.S. women's national team, it just brings tears to my eyes to see that, because when I was a young girl, we did not have those types of female heroes in our lives in the sports world. And even one of the biggest initiatives I worked on was share of voice within Nike as a marketing organization. What is that share of voice that we are putting out there in the market that is really driving that female athlete point of view, that don't just shrink it and pink it mentality that we had at Nike? Don't just take a men's version, make it pink, and then suddenly it becomes the female version of a product.
Was that a phrase at Nike? Don't just shrink it and pink it?
Yes, it certainly was.
I love that.
Yeah, well, it was a mantra that energized me. There was a problem to solve there.
Right.
It wasn't just a marketing message. It was like how we thought about designing product and how we were messaging what we were doing as a company, and not thinking that our dominant male athletes were going to have a halo effect on the women, so that we didn't have to elevate the women's voice within that. And we're not to the end of it by any stretch of the imagination. There's still much more work to do, but patience, I know that's been a hard thing along the way, but it has taken a lot of patience. And today, the data of how women's sports can actually move the needle from impressions or a brand perspective has started to make a massive shift. Data is backing that up. Back 10 to 15 years ago, we were pushing it forward in a way where there wasn't a lot of backing and support around women's sports. But every little win we got along the way, whether it was getting more female athlete representation in ad spots, more female athlete representation in media, getting the games on air, every little component of it that continue to keep chipping away and not trying to solve it all at one time. I say it with such conviction and power, and I've got my fists up in the air as I'm describing it, but metaphorically, that is how it was. It was a bit of the fight. I had to make sure that it wasn't a fight, and that anger that comes with the perception of a fight, I had to kind of loosen that. There were disappointments and failures, certainly, along the way, and there always are in everyone's career, especially when you're driving in a new area, trying to solve a problem. But I also know that that's where I learned the most. In those situations, the anger and high stress and emotion and fear, that's not going to lead you to a successful outcome. You have to get over the fight mentality, move on, and focus on how to visualize a better chance for success, a better way to go about it. You know that it's a journey, but you've got to force yourself really to have patience and really appreciate it along the way. Because as crazy as it seems, there's beauty in the struggle. Make that a motivator.
It's your life's work to have these bonds built and this belief that I can do anything that's really special. I know that in your career, especially early on, there were times when you really wanted to prove yourself. But when you talk about leadership, you said it's not always about having the answer. It's about being willing to engage in the conversation and learn the answer.
Yep.
Too often we do feel like, everybody's looking to us. We've got to be the leader. We've got to be out front. We got to lead from the fore. I love this line you had. Some of the greatest advice I ever got is, you don't need to be 2 or 3 steps ahead of people. The greatest gift you're giving is to allow others to get there on their own.
I've always had this mentality that you have to break yourself to make yourself. Be comfortable in an uncomfortable situation. So many great stories are like that. The first overseas trip I ever took by myself was with Nike. Very deep into my career, we were getting ready for a World Cup and, spent time in Brazil. It was the first time I had ever been on a plane by myself, first ever passport that I had in my hand and not knowing what I was doing. It was the most scary and daunting situation that I'd ever been in. And then stepping into a room of very senior marketers explaining my point of view on something that I didn't really feel I had the footing to do that. It's really about being humble in the process. That sense of nervousness and uncomfortable and you just don't know almost always leads to the sense of confidence and pride in the end. Usually it isn't just about if you have the answer all the time, it's the process and learning and listening to the room and taking all of that in and knowing when it's time for you to feel confident and comfortable in what you're going to say. You don't always have to have the answer. It's okay to be in a zone that allows you to find your own way. It's okay to be comfortable in that uncomfortable type of zone. And people are so quick to always want to answer the question because they feel like that's what's expected of them. It isn't about always having the answer. It's taking the time to learn and lean in on others and count and trust others around you to kind of balance that out. Sometimes that confidence can be overbearing, or if you put too much pressure on yourself that you always have to have the answer because you don't. Take pride and courage in those uncomfortable situations that make you better when you come out of it. It's almost like this feeling of this competitive high. If you're going into a situation and you're just so nervous about what your performance is going to be. And then you get yourself through it. That feeling of coming out of it is just so amazing. It's kind of like going to work out. The hardest thing to do is get yourself there. Once you're done, the feeling that you have when it's over, the pride that you have that you actually stepped up and did it, that feeling I love to have repeated over and over and over again.
I love that line. You have to break yourself to make yourself. It is that ability and that willingness. If you continue to push yourself in those ways, new opportunities will present themselves.
That's it. That's absolutely right.
Yeah. Thinking about that line, much of your career has been wandering into space that didn't really exist before you. It's not as if you could look around and say, oh, well, I'm going to follow that person, because so much of what you've achieved hadn't been really done before. I mean, some of the ways in which the world corporate environment is leaning into women's sports is reasonably new, and you can't look for other people to be your role models.
Absolutely. I've always found energy in that moment in time where I could be very uncomfortable in a situation or uncomfortable in the unknown, taking the time to find the problem, kind of solve the problem along the way, thinking about how am I going to grow from this situation? It's the ability to find motivation in things that haven't been solved, or even with change. It isn't about keeping the trains on the track. That's not what motivates me. Some people that it does, and you find that consistency is what is their motivator for them. Mine was always that ability to see something and try to think about it in a different way. What am I going to do, and how am I going to influence that to move in a different direction? And some of the greatest leaders of all time, Oprah, Steve Jobs, anyone in that zone, it was always about challenging convention. Within that, they challenged themselves. They didn't write history by just repeating things that had already been done. Not that I'm writing history by any means, but I find a huge motivation for myself in that zone, and I always have.
It's really powerful. I want to ask you about Kobe Bryant, one of the most revered competitors on the planet. Tell me a story that maybe is one of your best takeaways from your work with his organization.
Yeah. I was at Gatorade, living in Chicago, and then moved to California. The question for him was, what's next? He had torn his Achilles at the time and, had a lot of time thinking this 20-year career is about ready to come to an end. So we had to kind of take a lot of that knowledge and experience and understand what that newfound passion was going to be. There was no roadmap. The roadmap at the time for professional athletes was typically, in a long-standing, amazing career in that way, was to move into podcasting or coaching. He certainly wasn't built that way and was never one that was going to kind of fit into conventional thinking. He separated himself in order to create separation. All in all, he kind of inspired greatness in himself, but he did it so much in others. And that's his greatest legacy that he's still leaving behind today.
Absolutely. And obviously you guys did it. The whole mama mentality thing went from curiosity to now I want some of that.
That's right.
So reading about your leadership style, you're a big believer in collaboration and empowering. In the corporate world, the word teams is just way too overused. People describe their team, but the truth is most corporate organizations aren't really teams. They're a bunch of individual contributors.
Uh-huh.
What advice would you give to a young leader trying to take a group of individuals and mold them into a team?
Communication. Communication is key, and always being available for your team. Understanding the individual's personal goals and what defines kind of their own personal greatness to succeed. What motivates your individual team members? Because I can guarantee you it is not a one size fits all. Then it is building that point of kind of a sense of mutual trust and respect. Those motivators and those levers are very different from team to team. for the most part, I have a team of former athletes. I have former Olympians on my team. And, I've always brought that spirit of athletes into the boardroom or the executive room with me and along the way. So with that, though, you have to understand there's a high level of competition, but I can guarantee there's a level of motivators that's different for each one. The more that we as leaders kind of embrace that and we understand it, the better off the sum of the parts are as it relates to how the team is a high-powering unit together. Everyone is an individual first, but what leads to that high performance is bringing those strengths of the individuals together and finding a common goal that you're all trying to achieve.
I love that. Get to know your team, find out what drives them, what their levers are, and that way you'll be able to pull them together in a different way.
That's right.
Andrea Fairchild, I've learned so much. I've taken pages and pages of notes here, and I am grateful for the opportunity to have learned from you today. Thank you for joining us and being a corporate competitor.
Well, I want to thank you too for everything that you have done and helping all of us corporate leaders along the way learn from others. Our saying at Kobe Inc. was there's power in understanding the journey of others so you can help create your own. If anything, you are playing that forward by having these conversations, from learning from others' stories, and then knowing how much that it will help others, hopefully, and taking a piece of it away and kind of helping to shape theirs.
Well, I am honored that we got this time today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Man, I am a bigger fan of using my Visa card tonight than I was before this podcast. Thank you very much. I'm grateful for the opportunity to learn from leaders like Andrea. So there were 3 great takeaways for me. I love it when she said, behind every number, there is a story. What a great concept. We should get to know the story behind the number, not just of the athletes we're going to be cheering for, but also we need to know the story behind the teammates that we share. What motivates those that we are leading? And the more we know of that kind of detail, the better we will be as leaders. My second great takeaway was you have to break yourself to make yourself. I love that phrase that she said, you have to be comfortable being uncomfortable. When you actually go out, do things that you weren't ready to do before the day began, you're going to find a sense of accomplishment, of pride in what you've been able to do that will carry you forward and allow you to do even more. And finally, my third great takeaway came from Andrea's time working with Kobe Bryant, one of the great competitors of all time. Kobe made it clear, she said, his goal wasn't to be likable, but to be great. That's so true. Many people who want to be highly successful, but they also want to be highly popular. And often those things are in conflict. Kobe was clear. His goal was to be great. In all of that, there was this interesting leadership dynamic. Leadership is not about being popular. It's about being the very best you can and pulling the best out of others. Andrea was a gift today, and I'm honored to have been able to spend that time with her. If these lessons have struck a chord with you, I encourage you to reach out to me and my team at maxwellleadership.com/Don. And together, let's elevate your company, your culture, your greatness. Thanks so much today for being a corporate competitor with us. If you could share one habit, one thing you've done consistently that allowed you to separate yourself from your competitors, what would it be? In my 30-year career, 2,500 of the greatest athletes, coaches, and leaders answered that question for me.
This is Don Yeager, who did that that article I was telling you about.
Don, Dave Sims with Coach K. How you doing?
Hey, Don. How you doing, my man? Great, sir.
What they gave to me is what I'm giving to you in my online course, Journey to Greatness. Through engaging storytelling and on-demand videos, you will learn the 16 habits that will jumpstart your personal growth. I will instruct you on how to apply these winning characteristics to your life through custom workbook exercises. We are slashing the price for our podcast listeners. Lifetime access to Journey to Greatness is normally $399, but for our podcast listeners, it will be $49 with the code podcast at checkout. Click the banner on corporatecompetitorpodcast.com to enroll. Thanks for listening to the show. I would be so grateful if you left us a rating and a review. To be the first to listen, subscribe to the podcast on our website, corporatecompetitorpodcast.com. Plus, as a thank you gift, you will receive a free chapter from one of my best-selling books on the habits of high-performing teams. Stay in touch by connecting with me on social media at Don Yeager, Yaeger, on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Until next week, I appreciate you.